The August 9th meeting of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Felico, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Massey.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Freiling.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Here.
Mr. Zhang.
Here.
We have 4 sets of council meeting minutes before us. Are there any additions, corrections to these?
Mayor, I'd just like to point out that we did make some typographical corrections between the time that we published the agenda and today. So there are some revised minutes before you.
Thank you, Mr. Trivett.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move to approve April 9th and June 14th minutes.
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Maslin.
Abstain.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Freiling.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move to approve,
Oh, no, go ahead.
move to approve July 2nd and July 12th agenda.
Meeting minutes.
Second.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Felico?
Should
Mr.
let you do it.
Maslin.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Freiling.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
We have no matters of special privilege today and no public hearings. So we'll move directly to reports. Monthly financial statement. Mr. Trivett, anything you want to point out there?
You know, the only thing that Ms. Dameron and I were talking about before the meeting is, of course, the things that we always report on, the room taxes, the mills taxes, and the sales taxes. And the good news is that the June numbers for both room and meals are up 6.5 or 6.4 and 7.8 respectively. But the big news is probably in the sales tax revenue, which is a comparison of May, and that is up 31% from last year. So I've asked Barbara to look into that and see if we can come up with some ideas as to why that might be.
And that, it doesn't have to do with us paying back money that was misdirected to us back in 2017.
And it could be that it could be that stopped, but we need to check that out and compare that to the information from the state to see if the transfers have stopped or if businesses are up, or so we will do that and get back with you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Just another question. As we move forward in the tax collection with Senate Bill 942, are we going to develop a new box here, or are we going to incorporate that 1% in the 1% sales tax revenue box that we currently have?
We really would like to keep that separate. We're working with the other locality director of finance and the state to determine how we're going to get that information, but our hope is that they will separate that because, as you know, groceries aren't included, and so it would be our preference to separate that and create a new box.
Okay, good, thank you. No other questions?
I had one question on the expenses for the month of July this year versus last year. Public safety, there was a couple $100,000 difference, and it was the regional jail. Is that a timing thing? And when do we get those expenses hitting our budget?
I need to go back to give you specific on when they specifically hit, but more than likely it's a timing. I'll verify that and send out an email and let you know that is indeed it.
Thank you.
Questions? No? Moving on to monthly departmental operating reports. Anything you'd like to highlight there, Mr. Trivett?
I don't think so. They're all pretty much according to our expectations, and they've been submitted for your review. If there's any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Questions? Okay, thanks. Seeing none, we'll move on to city manager reports. The first is the National Citizen Survey results presentation. Mr. Trivett, you going to start this off?
I will, yes. Of course, as you all know, we are about to begin our biennial process of looking at the goals, initiatives, and outcomes, and our first step in that really is the kickoff, which is the presentation of the National Citizen Survey results. And this year marks our 10th year participating in the survey, every 2 years, of course. And so we decided that it would probably be best to make a little change to how we present the data, and we actually asked the National Research Center, who conducts the survey for us, to come down and present the results so that it was somewhat of an independent review of the city's performance. And with that, I'll introduce Morgan Adams, who's going to give us the presentation.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Morgan Adams, as Andrew said. I'm a research associate with the National Research Center, and I'm here to present your 2018 results. I was the project manager this year for Williamsburg, and so I'd like to take a moment to thank Andrew for all of his hard work on this project. Great. Okay. So in general, you're going to find that this presentation is a summary of the detailed info provided in those full set of reports, which I'm sure that you've all memorized by this point. But I'm going to go over the key findings as well as a little bit of the methodology and a little background on the NCS. I'll have time at the end for questions, but if you have any as we're going along, please feel free to ask. So the National Citizen Survey, or the NCS as we like to call it, is a turnkey templatized citizen survey that we created jointly between our company and the ICMA. Now, because it's templatized, it allows us to keep the cost low for you, but it also provides us with the greatest number of comparisons to our national benchmarking database. So we've been in this business of creating surveys for local governments for well over 20 years now, and our research over time has led us to find that there are three main pillars of community livability, and these are community characteristics, governance, and participation. And you'll find that your results are categorized into these three pillars. Within each of these pillars, we've derived 8 facets, and these include safety, mobility, natural and built environment, economy, and so on. And you'll find that each question that we ask in the NCS also is further categorized into these 8 categories. So this year was the 6th administration of the NCS for Williamsburg. We conducted a randomized scientific sample of 1,600 households. Each household received 3 separate mailings. One was a pre-notification postcard to let residents know that the survey would be coming in the mail, followed by 2 waves of the survey itself that included a cover letter giving people instructions about what was going on, and those also included a link where people could go online and take the survey there. In the end, we received 379 completed surveys, which gave us a 25% margin of, or 25% response rate, and a 5% margin of error. So as I mentioned, we have over 600 jurisdictions in our national benchmarking database, and so we've compared the 2018 results to this database. We had 133 comparisons that were available, 112 were similar, 20 were higher, and only 1 was lower. And to give you just a little bit of perspective on how we calculate those benchmarks, what we do is we look at the national average. And if you're 10 points different from that average, you're considered higher or lower. So we've tried to make this particularly difficult to be higher and lower, to really highlight those areas in which are strengths in your community, and then those areas that might need more focus. And then we also have, if you see the trends over time report, you'll see that some of them are much higher. That denotes that there's a 20-point difference between the national average and yours. So those are quite nice. Now, compared to 2016, ratings remain stable pretty much over time. We had 9 increases and 11 decreases, and those tended to be related to mobility.
Can I ask a question there?
Sure.
When you talk about decreases, does that include something going from much higher to higher or higher to even?
No. Those ratings for the benchmark, they do shift a little bit over time as we continue to add communities to that benchmarking database that I was talking about, but they tend to be fairly similar. So these that I'm just talking about here are significantly different between the 2016 and the 2017 ratings. That means that there's at least a 5% difference. So this is our honeycomb structure, and what this gives you is a broad overview of how overall each of these facets rated against the national benchmark. As you can see, they were all similar here in Williamsburg. And then we also asked residents to identify areas that they felt were a priority for the community over the next 2 years. And they chose safety, natural environment, and economy. As I mentioned, the presentation is really going to be based around those key findings that we have in that livability report. So our first key finding is that Williamsburg is a desirable community and people feel safe. Nearly 9 in 10 survey respondents gave excellent or good scores to Williamsburg as a place to live, and this was similar to comparison communities and has been stable since 2008. A similar proportion of residents gave positive assessments to the overall appearance of the community, and aspects that enhance quality of life, such as the city as a place to raise children and as a place to retire. You'll notice with these stars on this presentation that denotes that these ratings were higher than the national benchmark. So overall appearance and place to retire were both higher. And while place to raise children was similar to those benchmarks, it's worth noting that this has actually increased pretty substantially since 2008. It's gone from 76% to 90%. Citizens were also pleased with their overall quality of life, their neighborhoods as places to live, and the overall image or reputation of the community. And the overall image and reputation was higher than national benchmarks. So with these ratings, it's really no surprise that residents feel a strong sense of loyalty to the community. We had about 8 in 10 indicate that they would recommend the city to someone who might ask, and 3/4 stated that they would remain in Williamsburg for the next 5 years. 9 in 10 or more of Williamsburg residents felt safe in the community overall, as well as in their neighborhoods and in the downtown commercial area. These rates have been stable since 2008 and were similar to national peers. Ratings for safety services were also very positive. We had about 9 in 10 awarding excellent or good marks to fire and ambulance services. About 8 in 10 felt favorably about police services. And these were also similar to the national averages and to previous years. Prevention services were also rated favorably. About 3/4 praised crime prevention, and 9 in 10 felt positively about fire prevention. And there's been an 11% increase in excellent or good ratings for fire prevention since 2008. It shouldn't be a surprise that very few individuals have reported a crime or been the victim of a crime in the 12 months prior to the survey. We also found that about half had stock supplies in event for an emergency. This has increased since 2016 and was higher than national levels. In a special interest question that was designed to gauge if residents feel the city is accomplishing its goals related to the vision of Williamsburg, we found that nearly all residents strongly or somewhat agreed that Williamsburg is a safe city. Our next key finding was that ease of travel is generally regarded positively, but they do have some concerns about city streets. Most felt that the overall ease of travel was at least good, and around 2/3 rated the availability of paths and walking trails, ease of walking and car travel positively, and a similar proportion of residents also indicated that they had walked or biked instead of driving, and this level was higher than national averages elsewhere. Ease of travel by public transportation was also awarded high scores by about half of residents, and this has increased since 2016. Traffic flow has also steadily improved over time and outshines national comparisons. And I think that it's really noteworthy to point this particular rating out because in other desirable communities like yourselves that receive ratings that are similar, we tend to see more issues with ease of travel, basically due to cars. So I think that it's something that's nice to point out here. So residents did identify some of the mobility-related aspects that they felt could use improvement. We had about 6 in 10 that reviewed street cleaning and street lighting positively, and about half felt the same way about street repair. Each of these items did decrease 10 or more percentage points since 2016, so they might merit further focus. And snow removal was the only service that was evaluated at lower levels than national averages and has been steadily decreasing over time. So in addition to various aspects of quality of life, survey participants identified the natural environment as an asset that they would like to protect. As a whole, a majority of respondents were pleased with the aspects of natural environment. More than 8 in 10 gave excellent or good marks to the overall natural environment, and 9 in 10 felt the same about the cleanliness of Williamsburg, which was higher than levels elsewhere. And a vast majority of residents also applauded the air quality and garbage and yard waste services. To demonstrate their commitment to the environment. Quite a few said that they had engaged in green behaviors, such as making their homes more energy efficient, conserving water, and recycling at home. 96% of citizens agreed that the Williamsburg is a beautiful city, and they are fulfilling their part of that mission. Like the natural environment, economy was identified as a priority. Around 6 in 10 were pleased with the overall economic health, as well as business and service establishments, the vibrancy of the downtown commercial area, and the city as a place to work. Approximately 4 in 10 favorably scored the cost of living and employment opportunities, and most of these evaluations have been relatively stable since 2008. Highlights within the economy ratings for Williamsburg were the city as a place to visit and the shopping opportunities. It's worth mentioning also that 1/3 of residents were optimistic that the economy would have a positive impact on their income in the next few months. Both the city as a place to visit and shopping opportunities were higher than national levels. Residents also reported that they worked within the city at higher rates. About half said that they do so. And our final highlight for your results were that Williamsburg residents are reporting higher levels of engagement within the community. In the relationship between residents and leadership, communication is definitely key. Efforts to engage the community are reflected in the positive ratings for government. We found that 8 in 10 respondents were pleased with their opportunities to volunteer and the public information services provided by the city. And about 2/3 felt that social events and activities, as well as their opportunities to participate in community matters, were excellent or good. These residents also thought highly of the sense of community, the overall direction that the city is taking, and the city welcoming citizen involvement. Respondents also reported higher levels of volunteering, participating in clubs, and campaigning for an issue, cause, or candidate in 2018, and these rates outpaced levels elsewhere. Additionally, about 70% of residents somewhat or strongly agreed that the city operates in full partnership, not only with the people who live here, but the people who work here as well. As I mentioned, we included a special interest question asking people about their level of agreement or disagreement that the city was fulfilling its vision statement and all the little mini parts that are included in that. We found about 3/4 felt overall that the city was fulfilling this vision. And then about 8 in 10 felt that the city was livable and it operates in full partnership with those who visit. And about 7 in 10 felt that the government was cohesively led, financially strong, and always improving. So in summary, the main takeaways from the 2018 NCS results were that Williamsburg continues to be a great place to live and residents feel safe. The ease of travel is generally positive, but city streets might merit focus. The natural environment is an asset, and residents would like to protect this aspect. The economy is a priority, and residents are increasingly engaged. So once we've collected the data, many communities ask themselves, now what? Well, from the point of conducting a citizen survey, it's not only there to gain feedback from residents, but also to use that data in future decision-making processes. A couple of reasons that the NCS kind of simplifies that traditional planning is that it's based on resident opinions, and they are your customers. So it's nice to figure out what they think about the quality and importance of items. And it's solid data. So it helps you ID those areas that you might not have been thinking about, might reinforce some of those places that you do think needs improvement. And it also can support the strategies that you're thinking about taking. So this in mind, I'm just going to go over the 6 E's of action, as we like to call them, just to give you a little bit of an example of how other communities use their results. I'm sure that you're already implementing some of these, but it can't hurt to talk about a few examples. So the first action is envision. So using the results for strategic planning, you saw that the residents identified safety, economy, and natural environment as priorities for them. So that info could provide you with some guidance depending on what your strategies are going to be for the next few years. We often recommend that both city staff and leadership get together to talk about some focus areas that they can come up with together, and then use those areas to come up with strategic action plans. Obviously, many of our clients have used our survey results to allocate limited resources. There's always just a little bit of money and a lot of things to do. So residents feel that the overall travel in the community was easy, but things like street repair and cleaning, lighting, the snow removal might be areas that you might think about for additional funding. If there are any results that might be surprising to you based upon the survey, it might be education that you decide to take action on. Advances in technology have greatly improved our ability, the government's ability, to connect with residents, both through social media and through websites. So for instance, when you're talking about snow removal, it might be that residents just need to know more about what your processes are, your policies, the streets that are your responsibility and those that are not. Even real-time updates might be a good conclusion for them. So obviously the social media and website are great for educating. They're also excellent tools for engaging your citizens. For example, if you wanted to make some street repair improvements, you could ask for feedback very easily based upon those platforms, kind of figure out what locations they might like. Things like that can help you with that process. But when we're talking about engagement too, we realize that the community is definitely larger than its government. There are other people that are playing a role. And so it's always great to have partnerships with the private sector, community-based organizations, and other government entities to help you achieve those goals, so you're not doing it alone. So as many of you well know, one of the greatest strengths of local government is being able to enact new strategies and policies that will help improve these areas. I don't need to explain that one to you. And finally, we talk about evaluating. The activist citizen survey is itself an evaluation. However, repeated use of it can really help outline which policies, programs, and personnel changes that you've made have really made an impact. I think that's why your trend data is so important. It really highlights things that might have happened in those past years that might have impacted either way. A lot of times, for instance, with the snow removal, you might have a year where you weren't planning on having a lot of snow. You just ended up falling behind. It's kind of luck and chance sometimes. So those can help also explain things that are happening in your results. And you know, we do have some clients that have struggled to understand why their results have remained stable over time and are somewhat average, but no matter what kind of changes you're making, those things aren't changing. So, for instance, one of our clients, Longmont, Colorado, they decided that instead of an annual citizen survey, they were going to alternate that with a policy survey. And so what they did was they used the citizen survey to find out where the priorities were, and then they came up with strategies and policies that they were thinking about making, sent out a survey on those, and then what they did was they used what resident support best found would make them feel better about the situation, and then they enacted those, and then again used the citizen survey to provide feedback from that larger population. So that's something that other communities have done, not something you have to do with us. It's just an idea to help kind of understand how that feedback loop occurs. So with that, those are possible avenues for using your data, and at this time I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. I'll turn to my colleagues for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. There's a lot of data in there and a lot
Yes.
of good information. You know, it does make me proud that we do excel on so many things, and certainly that we're meeting the expectations of the residents, you know, for the most part. Obviously, we've got to work on that snow removal or work on having less snow. I don't know.
One or the other.
Yeah, I don't know how prepared one can be, you know, for, you know, outliers like I think we had last year, and
Right.
I think you spoke to that. In terms of the sampling, so we send out 1,600, and that's entirely random. What's the likelihood that you know the same folks may end up getting it, you know, year after year? Because I think there's you know a segment of the population that would feel compelled to want to do this, and so. So I just wonder if those 379, you know, are the same folks every year. I know that I got it 4 years ago, but I didn't get one this year. And so I know that there's opportunities out there.
Sure.
What's in your analysis? How many are these repeat survey takers? Do you have any idea? Do you track their names or?
We don't track names. Everything's anonymous, but that's a great question. So what we do is we gather a randomized sample of every resident or household here in the city, and then we use a sampling technique to make sure that we're getting a random sample. Often what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll look at the previous year's survey and I'll look for duplicates so that the same residents aren't getting that survey repeatedly over and over and over again, because we don't want them to get survey fatigue.
Sure. How do you know that they're the same person? If not by
Based
name?
upon residents,
Okay.
we don't know whether or not, I mean, if someone's moved their household and they get it again by chance, there's not much I can do about that. But there are also residents sometimes who don't want to be contacted. We're happy to take them off the list and make those kinds of notes. But there's usually enough households, unless you're a very small community. We have had some that are 300. Everyone in that community is going to get the survey over and over again.
Right.
But usually with that randomized sample, it tends to mix things up enough.
Sure. Okay. The other thing that just curious, 98% of the people that took the survey say they feel very safe. Yet 71% said crime prevention is a concern for them. What are the different questions in each of those two different? How do we generate different? So drastic. Maybe it's not drastic, but it seems like a large degree of difference there between the two, and I would think they'd be closer.
Sure. So a lot of that can come down to how they're kind of perceiving that question. So in that special interest question where we're asking people, how is the government fulfilling these? They might think that you're doing a really great job overall, making sure that Williamsburg is a safe city, and they feel very positively about your performance. But on the other hand, it might be that with crime prevention, there might be an incident that had happened or something similar where they're thinking that that sticks in their mind, and maybe next time they just won't rate it as highly. But I think also with prevention services, so few people use the safety services that I think a lot of times it can come down to education. A lot of people don't know perhaps what's going on in the community to prevent that kind of thing. Like a lot of people with kids might hear about, days of yore, a DARE program or something like that that's going on. But I think opening up that engagement, especially, communication channels between the police department or their public liaison and the community to kind of tell them what's going on, all the actions that they're taking, can help people to feel more safe. We did find, with those specific safety questions where we asked them how safe or unsafe do you feel, at least 9 in 10 did say that they felt safe overall in their neighborhoods in the downtown area. And I should actually note that, people felt more safe in the downtown area than in their neighborhoods just by a smidge. And that's really unusual too. So I think in general there, we can say that police services are doing a great job. It just might be that people don't know much about the prevention.
The other thing I think I noticed, it seems like every year fire rates higher than police. Is that in keeping with the national trends?
Yes. People in general just rate fire services really, really highly.
Right.
I think that's...
Generally, when you need a fireman, you want them there, but when you see a police officer, you not necessarily want them.
It's true.
Firemen
I get
don't
a bad
give
rap.
out speeding and parking.
Right.
That's very true. And so that's why I think the benchmarks are a really great thing, because they can provide you that context. A lot of times before we had the database, people would say, well, people are rating streets in the 30%. Like, what are we doing wrong? But then when you realize that that's within context, that's very normal. And I think that makes you feel better. You can't really compare streets, which people will always complain about, to fire services that people always love. So.
Well, I asked this question about police. I'm not being critical. I think they do a great job here. I'm glad that 98% of the respondents said they feel safe here. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks, Ms. Adams, for your presentation. And I saw that there were 50 slides on the presentation. You went through it very gracefully. So we appreciate that you're here and for presenting on the survey results. And kind of echoing what my colleague said, there's a lot of great things to draw from this. And this provides actually as a benchmark and standards for our own policy planning process, where this council would listen to its residents and kind of prioritize which policies to enact based on some of the results we've received from this survey. So I think we have a great foundation moving forward. Just have one question with regard to the sample size. So I know, from what I understand, last time your colleague was here to present on the methodology. And I know that some of these surveys are sent out to homes that turn out to be rental units, so sometimes students who live in those rentals, particularly around our downtown area, would respond to that because it just goes to the household. In terms of the online responses you've gotten, I'm curious, were you able to see how much kind of the age demographic spread on the responses there? Did it tend to lean younger, older? I mean, what was kind of your...
Unfortunately, we only had about 21 respondents apply online, so it's a little hard to draw patterns from there.
Sure.
We do know that younger individuals, people who are not white, tend to adopt those practices and doing that online much easier than say, our older white female ladies who like to respond to surveys. So I think that it's always great to have that option for people.
Mm-hmm.
We also tend to find when we do an open participation survey, which we didn't do this year for Williamsburg, but we tend to find that those people are more engaged and they do tend to be younger. So I think that that's something that, it's nice to include. But most of the time, the convenience of having that mailed survey and just being able to put it in that prepaid envelope and send it back is so much easier for people that it's really not uncommon for us to see only maybe 3 to 10% of respondents responding online.
And this is kind of more of just a curiosity that I thought of. I'm curious to see in terms of when you do surveys across localities, including this one, and in particular, I'm thinking about residents feeling that they're getting more engaged, which is a great thing. I hope even more residents get engaged in this process. I wonder, in certain national trends, like right after an election year, do you typically see an uptick in citizen engagement across the board from all different localities across the country, or is that kind of more just, focused on, the fact that the city is great, it's small, and there are many opportunities to get involved? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know that, like an election like in 2016, I don't know if that impacts whether or not people are going to be volunteering in the community or not. I definitely think that an increase in campaigning probably had something to do there. I think after any kind of big election like that, presidential or local, we do tend to see a little bit of an uptick. Then that's the nice thing kind of about that benchmark trend is we're continually adding new people there, so we might see some changes. Over time, we've seen people are generally rating their local governments higher, and so as that's going up, and if you're still higher than that benchmark, then that means that you're still truly exceptional in that way.
Right.
You're still bucking that national trend in a very good way.
Right.
So I do think that we tend to see a little bit more community engagement, but it really depends on the city. Even in some cities where you're constantly reaching out, sometimes citizens just don't want to reach out back. So I think that it really says a lot that that those marks are increasing and that you're higher than the benchmark there.
And you would say the 25% response rate, that's pretty much average. Or actually, it's
is
above average, right? Because
Yes.
usually surveys are around 10 to 15%.
With our general citizen surveys, the civic duty tends to up that a little bit. We
Okay.
tend to see between maybe 20 and 28%. That's the
Okay.
normal average. Some communities get up into the 30s, but they tend to be very few. So 25% is right smack in the middle. And really what you're concentrating on too is that margin of error.
Right.
That's really what we're going for. The industry standard is 5%. You have 5%. So,
Right.
so we can also say that those results are very accurate too.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here again.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, and I wanted to thank you. I think having you come and do the presentation adds a lot to to sort of how we can take information in. And a lot of the questions and comments that my colleagues have asked were on my list too, but just a couple things.
Sure.
Benny asked about the 25% and looking at the national benchmark comparisons on the map that you have there. I noticed that it seems to be clumped a lot in the sort of mid-Atlantic, Virginia, Maryland area. There's a lot in Wisconsin, Colorado, a couple places, California and Florida. Do you all do any regional comparisons, or is it strictly on a national comparison?
No, we do what we call custom benchmark comparisons. If that's something that you're interested in, I can definitely talk to Andrew about it. But yeah, we allow you to choose those comparisons based upon your region or your state, population, income, race, ethnicity. It just depends on what you're interested in, what you feel are your sister cities. And that can help kind of dial down that context as well and provide you with a more localized comparison.
Thank you. That might be something worthwhile, particularly as sort of based on our demographics and area. And speaking of our demographics, I think that as a place to retire, and a lot of retirees goes hand in hand with the number of volunteerism that we have in this community, because there are a lot of opportunities and we have a lot of people with a little extra time that like to participate. And as far as, going into a natural environment is something that's very important and helps with our fulfilling of the vision. I think of natural environment and streets and walkability sort of going hand in hand with some of the things that we have coming up. For instance, anyone who's been out on Ironbound Road and Long Hill has seen lots of upheaval there, and the street is in total disrepair, but it's the first step of getting to a much better walkable and bikeable environment, and the same for other areas to come. So I think it sort of goes hand in hand. It's important to take it into context, too, of what the long-range goals are. So
I completely agree.
And the same with the economy. We all recognize, and I think that's one thing with the downtown vibrancy study and spending so much effort on ways that we can revitalize downtown and create more economic opportunities that, again, hand in hand with what people have been recognizing as a key vision issue.
Absolutely.
So I thank you again, and it gives us first steps towards our GIOs.
Thanks. I've got one question and some comments and observations.
Sure.
So in our general area, the neighboring cities and counties, which ones of those are participating in these citizen surveys?
We have a number in this area. Let's see. Many, like she said, many of them are kind of in the northern. Richmond is one. We have Powhatan County, yes. We're actually going to be presenting there tomorrow. And I could probably get you a list, to be honest with you, off the top of my head. We do have quite a number. This area tends to be concentrated. Like she said, we've got a lot of Minnesota clients, Colorado clients, Florida clients in particular. So, yeah, it just kind of depends, but I'm happy to get you a list.
Okay.
If you're interested.
So I appreciate the evolving nature of the questions. I know that over time you've been adding questions about livability, and which is good, and then you're building a trends or being able to compare, since some of these questions are new and you can't compare to prior years. In terms of benchmarking, I think it would be great to be able to benchmark against our neighboring communities, because I think that's where we're compared more so than what California is doing.
Definitely.
One of the comment about snow removal, I think that was a little misleading. I think you were probably getting comments more from people who spend more time in the counties than Virginia Beach, where they don't remove snow in neighborhoods, than Williamsburg.
And that's entirely possible. A lot of people don't know the distinction between what's county responsibility and what's city responsibility. So those do feed in there, those misconceptions, which is why I think that, just communicating about your responsibilities or your plans can definitely help improve those things. It doesn't always have to be money.
And we also have neighborhoods where it's private, so the city's not responsible for that anywhere.
Exactly.
And I don't know if you have any way that would be one, because you could tell by address which ones of those are part of the survey too.
Well, we don't track their responses based upon their address. It's something that we can do, but in order to keep that survey completely anonymous, we don't continue to connect those two. We want people to feel like they can give their honest feedback, so they're not being tracked.
But you at least know in the sample. In other words, the
yes,
questionnaires
yes.
are going out to so many people in those neighborhoods.
Right.
One thing I think would be interesting to do is a focus group on, taking a sampling of your sampling afterwards, and then sitting down with them and explaining for some of the services that most people aren't normally going to know about.
Yeah.
Explaining what the city actually is doing, and then see if that changes their response on those. Because some of it may be, we don't communicate what we're doing in all these areas, and if they haven't used the services, they wouldn't normally know anyway.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, if you look at the technical appendices report, we've got a section there where we have the responses and the frequencies based upon those who did have an opinion, and then we also have a set with those don't knows included too, so you can kind of see how that changes based upon whether or not people are engaged. Childcare and preschool is always one that there are a lot of don't knows. Ease of travel by public transportation is another one. So I agree. I think that any way that you can engage your citizens and talk about what it is that you're doing or what is and is not your responsibility are always great ways to connect, because it doesn't need to be simply that you're putting more money or you're changing policy toward a resource, but more, talking to them and educating them about what's actually going on.
They also may be looking at factors that influence choices, taking a study on some of those. For example, factors that might influence where companies would locate operations or headquarters, and maybe that's something that economic development could look at a subset of those responses and see where we can improve or where we could highlight in terms of how we present ourselves as a community. It would be good. And a couple of the pictures in your slides in terms of sending this out to our community. I'm not sure for loyalty to the community we would necessarily need a snow scene. I think maybe something else there. And then also,
I can definitely change it.
Ease of travel. I appreciate the California freeway scene, but I'm not sure that's appropriate here. And then finally, I think that we can really increase the participation rate. And maybe next time in 2 years, we have a campaign where we actually try to do that. Maybe the Virginia Gazette can help us on that. Thank you.
Ms. Adams, can you just talk a little bit about there are 500 cities or more?
About 650.
650?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all over the country and all different sizes?
Yes.
So we are in the same pool with much bigger cities, and as you mentioned, you had some that are even much smaller.
Yes. There's a list of those communities in the technical appendices underneath of the national benchmark tables, and that gives you a full list. So yeah, the population sizes are very disparate.
You talked about the 5% margin of error.
Mm-hmm.
Is that 5 percentage points one way or the other? Is that 5% of the response rate?
It's 5% of the total results. So if we had, say, 50% of people say that the community was safe, and they gave that an excellent score, then we would expect, if we sent the survey out to the entire population, that would be between 45 and 55%.
And does this get mailed to, how are the addresses determined? Obviously, they have to be within the city.
Yes.
There's no way to know how many might be college students, or this is going out during the college term?
It is, yes. What we do is we geocode the addresses when we create the mailing list, and this is a mailing list that we get that's randomized from the U.S. Postal Service, which is updated quarterly. So we make sure that we're getting the most recent addresses that we can. So we geocode those to make sure that everyone who's receiving the survey actually lives within the city limits. And then what we also do is people can answer those demographic questions on the very last page of the survey and kind of tell us more about themselves. So it's always possible to include questions about whether people are students, whether they're younger, et cetera, and we can figure out too. There is also a report that we offer called the Demographic Crosstabs Report, where we kind of look at the differences between responses based upon those demographics. Those that are interesting to you, we can always do that too. But yes, you'll have those results, including from the demographic questions in that technical appendices.
The snow removal rating does not particularly surprise me. I mean, we have such limited resources in this community. We're probably not going to change that anytime soon because the expense involved doesn't really justify the amount of times they're used. So it can take one event and then everybody
and that's
a less favorable opinion. The two responses, though, that surprised me were concerns about the condition of streets and that 3/4 of the community plan to live here for the next 5 years. And the reason that second one surprised me is if college students are receiving this, you would think most college students are not planning on being here for the next 5 years. So to have and we have a somewhat transient population through military. So I thought that was particularly high, but the concern about the condition of the streets was probably the one that surprised me more, and I think one we ought to do a little more looking into. So, any other questions? You want to close with?
Well, the only thing that I wanted to add is that, the executive team, the department heads and I have been looking at the data from the National Citizen Survey as we've started our conversation about the GIO process. And what we're trying to do is kind of extract from the data that we've received those scores that we need to focus on so that our GIO process this year can be more focused on those things that we really need to move the needle on. And in that conversation, it's been interesting. We've talked about some of those lower ratings that surprised the staff that's doing the work. And in those areas, like street repair, we think we're doing an above average job. Certainly in my experience, in other localities, we're doing an above average job. And that's a credit to Public Works. So the question is, why are we getting scored lower? And I think it was you, Mayor, in our discussion about this earlier, suggested that we may be getting lower scores because people are remembering problems with VDOT roads like I-64, thinking that that's somehow attributed to the survey. We could be getting lower scores because of people's experiences in the counties that surround us. I think that's probably likely. But also I think it points out that we may not be doing as good a job as we should be in communicating what we're doing to the community. And that's not a slight on our existing communication process. All it's pointing out is we're still not reaching the audience the way that we want to, because I think if we talked to the department heads and said, how well do we think we're communicating? Certainly Leanne would say, I think we're doing really, really well. Again, above average. And so those are good topics that you may see as suggested GIOs coming out of the department heads is communication. And we need to spend some time in the next 2 years really studying that and looking at new innovative ways to reach the audience.
And the end result here is not simply to get good scores.
Right.
I mean, it's really about, are we meeting the desires and needs of the people within this community? And helping them understand the parameters within which we work might help them understand how better to answer the question. But if they're not happy with something, then we can't be defensive about that. We can't make excuses for that. We just have to make that better.
That's right.
Just a follow-up to Mr. Maslin. I went through the list and it looks like closest participants are Yorktown, Hampton, Newport News. About it here.
Oh, so we could get some good regional benchmarks.
Good here. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Adams.
Thank you.
Our next city manager report are the 2019-20 goals, initiatives, and outcomes schedule review. Mr. Trivett?
Right, so every year at this meeting, the city manager presents to you the schedule of events for the GIOs, and so this year we have done that again, and we've only made a couple of minor changes to it from previous years. One of the changes is that we have reordered when we do the city council retreat. In years past, that has been one of the very first things that we have done. And this year, what we'd like to do is have that after at least one of the planned public meetings so that we can bring to you some public input on what the GIOs should look like. Our process, we've started talking internally about what that's going to be. We've already started looking at putting together some rough draft, as I call them, GIOs from your staff that will help to populate the conversation for the public meeting and then the city council retreat that follows that. We are planning to have 2 actual public meetings this year instead of only 1. That second meeting is really kind of tentative to determine if we actually need it. One of the things that we talked about at department head level was the need to make sure that we were trying to capture as many citizens as we can in this input. So we're going to really try to kick up our online effort to capture information. In years past, it's been difficult because the structure of those public meetings don't translate well to a survey online, but we're going to see if we can't solve that this year. So that second meeting would really be geared toward making sure that we captured the student population if we didn't do it in the first meeting. And so that'll be kind of as needed as we move through the process.
I don't want to jump ahead of anybody here, but if we're really going to think about targeting or trying to engage the student population with a second meeting, have we also talked about venue?
We have. We obviously, typically this public meeting is held here in the community building. The department heads at our first discussion of this, we talked about the possibility of that second meeting actually being on campus.
And the public, all citizens would still be involved.
Of course, yes. It's just about bringing the meeting to you.
It probably would create an easier way for students to get involved.
Sure. So our next step would be, if the council likes the way the schedule is laid out right now, our next step will be very, very quickly, Sandy will start looking at calendars and trying to pick dates, particularly for the council's retreat. And then also we'll start looking at dates to hold those public meetings.
Questions, comments?
I'm really appreciative of the fact that we're going to have some public input before council meets at the retreat. I think that's going to be beneficial.
Thanks again for your due diligence and for your leadership on this. I'm excited to see what the discussions from staff level come to fruition, beginning with this GIO cycle, and particularly with the public meetings before our retreat. I think it's always great to have citizen input before council goes into the retreat. In terms of the online input from residents, we still have our system online that we capture information. I'm more curious, and this is particularly for folks who are watching online as well, and for the folks who are here. Do we also track if a resident puts a comment to one of our posts on Facebook, on our Facebook page, the city's Facebook page, do we include that as part of input as well?
We do to an extent. If, let's say, I'm going to answer this two ways. If we published a specific survey with very specific questions, and then we got a comment that was somewhat tangentially related to the topic, if it could be included, it would. But if we were trying to keep the data the same so that we can compare results, obviously that makes it hard.
And I know you're mentioning about a survey. I'm just talking about folks who just want to provide an input.
Oh,
saying
sure.
the city
Yes.
needs to do this.
Yes.
But city staff doesn't go on our local media Facebook pages and track the comments to a particular ordinance that's passed by this council. They don't look at the last word. So for folks who are listening, not that there's anything wrong with that, if you have a specific idea, I would recommend that you direct that to the city in some way, whether through Facebook or through taking our survey. That would be a lot more productive.
And you said it, but I'm going to say it again, including the city's own Facebook page. I know that
Right.
Ms. Hartman monitors that. If a question comes up, she brings it to our attention, and we do our best to answer it.
Yeah, nothing wrong. I get amused by reading the last word, but there's a lot of value. If you have an idea that's very important to the city and you feel strongly about it, don't feel bad if for some reason we don't get that because it's posted on another page or on the last words.
And along those lines, speaking of the electronic survey system that we've used in the past, Mr. Barham will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the intention would be, starting with this process, we're actually going to be using a different software with even greater capabilities.
Oh, cool.
So we're hopeful that this is going to turn out even better than it has in the past.
Very much so.
Other comments? No. Have we scheduled the state of the city?
We have not.
Okay, because that might be something that,
Yes.
once that's scheduled to put on here, is sort of the concluding event. Okay. Anything else from you, sir?
That's it.
Okay. We'll move on to city attorney reports.
I have a matter later in the agenda, but nothing now.
Unfinished business? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. Consideration and approval to purchase a replacement fire truck. Chief Dent.
Mayor Freiling and members of council, the city's FY 2019 vehicle replacement plan calls for the purchase of a new fire department pumper to replace our existing Engine 20. Engine 20 is a 2,000 Pierce Sabre pumper with approximately 60,000 miles on it. I've got a picture of it here so you can get a visual of what that looks like. I say approximately 60,000 miles. We've had some problems with the instrument cluster on that vehicle, and a couple times the gauges reset themselves, including the mileage gauge and the engine hours gauge. Eventually, we replaced the instrument cluster, but we think we're pretty accurate with the 60,000 miles that's on this vehicle. The new proposed engine would be a 2019 Pierce Enforcer pumper. So to begin this process, the department organized an apparatus committee that consisted of members of the fire department that through all levels of the organization and at least one representative from our vehicle maintenance shop to take a look at all the manufacturers out there, look at all the apparatus. They did some in-depth surveys. They also had demos brought to the station where they could put hands on and drive them and take a look at them. And also they talked to other areas, other localities, apparatus that they've purchased to understand some of the advantages and disadvantages of the apparatus that they purchased. As a result of all that work, which the committee worked for almost a year, worked really hard because obviously we need them to stay within budget, but also they're very experienced in their jobs, and they want to bring the best piece of equipment to Williamsburg so they can operate appropriately. So there were a lot of factors that we considered when looking to purchase new apparatus. Some of the additional space in the cab and the jump seat. Now the apparatus has airbags in the front and the rear for all passengers for front impact and for rollover. It also has seatbelt monitoring, and one of the important features is electronic stability control. So these sensors within the apparatus can sense that the apparatus on a sharp turn may start to roll over. It reduces the RPM and steadily applies the brakes. And it also does in the same fashion if the sensors sense that the apparatus may be losing traction, it can slowly apply the brakes to prevent that from happening. Sorry. Another one, reliability. Obviously, with the age of apparatus and the number of incidents that this piece of equipment has responded to, reliability becomes an issue. Aging parts, it's out of service quite a bit for maintenance. So one of the things that's really important to us is we don't really have a reserve fleet. I try to rotate all of the apparatus so we can keep the mileage down on all of our pumpers. One of the problems with that, if this is out of service, is it really limits our ability to rotate that apparatus. And just as a point of reference, the reason that rotation is important is looking at our call volume as of yesterday. We're already pacing about 250 calls of where we were at this point last year. So it's very important to have that other piece of apparatus so we can keep that rotation of up-front apparatus to keep the mileage down on all of it. Obviously, as the apparatus ages, we start worrying about the large items such as the pump and the transmission and the engine. We haven't had experienced any of those breakdowns yet, but with a 2000 fire truck, it's expected. Also, we run into a problem with availability of parts. In some instances, the parts aren't readily available. It increases the amount of time that the apparatus is out of service. And in some cases, thanks to our vehicle maintenance shop, we've had some obsolete components, and they've had to manufacture some components to keep the truck in service. And then National Fire Protection Association has standards for fire apparatus. Right now, their recommendations are for any apparatus that's 15 years or older that it's either removed from the fleet or put into a reserve status. As I mentioned earlier, we really don't have a reserve status because we rotate all of our pumpers through the front line to keep the mileage down. And also because of the age of engine 20, it doesn't meet a lot of the other NFPA standards that are out there. So the new pumper is proposed to be purchased under a cooperative purchase contract through the Houston-Galveston Area Council of Governments, HGAC. We used this HGAC contract in the last purchase of our medic unit, which was extremely seamless process. And what HGAC does is they use a large group to work with vendors, to manufacturers, to bring down the cost of equipment. So by going through HGAC, we're able to really save some money on the purchase of the vehicle. This contract allows governmental agencies outside of Texas to take advantage of the contracts that they've awarded. In this instance, they awarded a contract to Atlantic Emergency Solutions, and state law and Williamsburg's purchase procedures allow us to take advantage of that HGAC contract. And staff determined that this was the bid awarded to Atlantic Emergency Solutions to be competitive, and we worked with them to make some changes in the specifications that would fit Williamsburg. We ended up with a contract price on the engine itself of $587,943. There were some other items that we had to acquire that required, that were not available from Atlantic Emergency Solutions. One of them is the Motorola radio, who we're already under contract with York County for our radio system. And then a thermal imaging camera, that was $11,874. This brings the total cost of the fire pumper to $599,817. This price also reflects a $25,300 discount that's awarded through Atlantic Emergency Solutions for a 90% prepayment at the time of purchase. We've done this in the past and been very successful with the contract with them. Also, Atlantic Emergency Solutions provides training for all of our personnel on the new apparatus. They also operate a full maintenance and repair facility in York County, and they also have mobile technicians are available to come to the station if repairs or maintenance are needed. The funding for the pumper was budgeted in the FY19 vehicle replacement plan at $600,000. The existing pumper, as we've done in the past, engine 20 will either be traded in or sold. In some instances, we've sold apparatus that we've removed from our fleet to some rural counties, localities, volunteer agencies that don't have the financial means to purchase new apparatus. Right now, we expect that price to be somewhere around $25,000, either for trade-in or an outright sale. I do have a couple volunteer organizations that have inquired about it. One of the things I did want to, in closing, is just to bring you up on our fleet of fire apparatus. Engine 10 is a 2011 model. Our tower is a 2012 model. And Squad 10, which is our rescue pumper, is a 2016 model. So this really, with the purchase of this new pumper, it really brings us into the modern age of all the safety features and technologies that's available in the fire service. So looking at that with the 15-year recommendation from NFPA, I'm sure to your excitement, it will be a while before, hopefully, unless it's something unforeseen, that I'll be standing before you to request purchase of another fire pumper. So with that, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Gosh, has it been 7 years since we got the ladder truck already? That's amazing. Chief, is it fair to say that our equipment probably go on more calls than some other jurisdictions because of the nature of the environment, the college and tourists and hotels, and I mean, we service a lot of calls.
We do, and again, we're on pace right now. Last year was over 4,100 calls. We're on pace to reach 4,500 calls this year. And the significance of that is that I can take, and I talk with other fire chiefs about this, even some other larger localities, we can take our station, and if we dropped it in with their busiest station, our call volume is in a lot of instances, is much higher than their busiest station. So it's, the call volume is high for a one-station department, and again, that goes back to why we try to rotate the equipment to keep the mileage down on all of our apparatus.
And I point that out because I think it's, some people may look and say, gosh, it looks new and shiny, and it's well taken care of, and it's only 8 years old. Do we really need to replace this? And to me, I mean, obviously, we want to provide the best safety equipment we can, because Lord knows if it's your family member that needs it, you want it to be there and reliable. And so it's hard to say no to that. But I think, given that, we do put a lot of hours on these trucks, and they go, a lot of short distance trips, and it's hard on a vehicle. It just makes sense that we would make sure that we have the best fleet possible, because they do take a lot of wear and tear. So that's all I have for now. And
to your point, a credit to our operational staff. I mean, the reason, even though it has the age on it, the reason it still looks good is because our staff is really diligent in taking care of our apparatus.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chief. And there's no question, public safety is one of the core functions of local government, and I wouldn't even hesitate to ever make sure that you and your staff have the best quality equipment. I'm just curious, in terms of the new standards for the National Fire Protection Association, what is the change with that now? What are the expectations with the engine, and how long it could run for and all?
So they recommend that anything that's older than 15 years old go into a reserve fleet or be taken out of the fleet. Their max end is 25 years to be removed from the fleet. Obviously, there's localities across the country that can't afford that. And, fortunately for us, with support of city council and city manager's office in the community, we're able to keep a rotation that keeps the latest and greatest apparatus up front for our folks and giving them the tools they need. But the 15-year, again, we don't have a designated reserve fleet where a lot of large localities have a vehicle that just sits there until it's needed when something else breaks down. We rotate all of them to try to, it helps us, the service life, the overall service life of the vehicle is much longer if we do it that way.
Given our situation, fully support it.
Thank you.
And I would like to obviously support it too, and I think what your presentation just points out the value of having a well-coordinated plan, both with the replacement plan and for the various factors that you mentioned, but also working cooperatively with the Houston purchasing group to get best value out of it, and with a company that can provide maintenance, and then also to allow the pumper to have sort of a second life somewhere else. So it's all in mind of best practices. And to Doug's point about the number of calls that we make, I think the number of miles probably belie the usage that the pumper has gotten, since we're such a small community getting here and there compared to the number of the actual usage that it's had. So.
And I did want to provide you with a picture of, this is what the new, obviously with the Williamsburg strike being if approved, but this is very similar to what the new 2019 pumper would look like.
It won't be yellow.
So, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. One observation, one question. So appreciate the new safety standards, because when I was a firefighter, we were actually still riding the back step. The suspension would actually have helped us when we were going over those dirt roads. And the one I remember was responding to Williamsburg Community Hospital in the middle of a lightning and thunderstorm, and whenever we would accelerate, all the water on the hose bed cover would come back into our turnouts. So we were wet by the time we got there. The question was, in terms of NFPA standards that Benny was mentioning, what does it say about at what year do we turn it into museum status? I'm not sure what year Engine 3 is it?
Yeah, I don't think they have a standard for turning it into museum status, but ironically, Engine 3, we had it out not too long ago, and it still pumps water.
Okay.
I don't think we'd want it responding on calls, but it still pumps water.
And it's great for the Christmas parade.
Yes.
Thank you.
So now we know how you keep your scores up on the National Citizen Survey. You just buy new fancy pieces of equipment. And Mr. Pons, you mentioned 8 years old. You meant 18 years old. This is a 2000 vehicle. Think how many people. I'm driving a 2000 car, and my kids are embarrassed to get in it. How many people still driving?
It's really you.
Vehicle, and one that gets worked as hard as these do 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So it's impressive that you've gotten the use out of it that you have. When we look at buying new equipment, do we evaluate the inventory of what we have by equipment type and then compare it to, is this really what we need, taking into account what our partners in the counties have? I'm sure you do that. Obviously, we have a ladder truck or tower truck, I think you called it. But how do you know that this is the right piece of equipment for this community?
Well, and we look at a lot of factors, and one of the things that we've realized over some of our recent purchases, well, in 2011, and even with the tower in 2012, and then the squad truck, there are a lot of EPA standards, and in order for the manufacturers to have sufficient room to get all of those items underneath the apparatus was getting taller. And obviously that's a challenge for some folks if we need to get hose off the back, the height of that apparatus. So specifically for this truck, we looked at a shorter wheelbase for more maneuverability around the city, and also we looked at reducing the height, so it makes it easier for our staff to reach the higher ladders and hose off the top of the apparatus. So we obviously the amount of water that's needed for fire flow that's needed for specific buildings. We take all of that into consideration when we purchase a vehicle.
And can you explain the role of Atlantic Emergency Solutions? Are they acting as the retailer for Pierce, who's the manufacturer?
Pierce is the manufacturer. Atlantic Emergency Solutions is the local dealer for Pierce. And about 75% of the fire truck market in Virginia is Pierce apparatus. For some of the reasons I stated, they also have a maintenance facility in Chester and a maintenance facility in York County, so that some of the other manufacturers offer maintenance facilities in Roanoke, for instance. So that's another factor that's considered in purchasing the apparatus from AE.
So they would be the exclusive Pierce retailer?
Yes, sir.
Last thing you might mention to Pierce is they ought to come up with better names. I mean, Saber, Enforcer. I would just think Extinguisher or Super Soaker. It just has such a better sound to it. But thanks to you and your team and all that you do. We appreciate it. The community appreciates it. And one last question. Is it fair to say that our two partner jurisdictions, James City County and York County, have as up-to-date and good equipment or better than we do?
Yes, actually, James City just took delivery of 2 new pumpers. And I know they have, over the next couple of years, they have in their plan to replace 2 ladder trucks.
I think the important thing there is that, we all rely on each other. So our appreciation to them, too, for keeping their fleets up. Do I hear a motion?
I move the City Council
Go ahead.
authorize the interim city manager to purchase a new fire pumper, thermal imaging camera, and mobile radio for a total purchase price of $599,817.
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zane?
Aye.
Motion passes. It takes us to the second item, which is a consideration of exception from personal property taxation for disabled veterans, proposed ordinance 18-06. Ms. Overy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for allowing me to share with you why there was a need for this ordinance and just give you a little bit of history on how we got here. A few months ago, when I first took office, we were contacted by a disabled veteran inquiring if he could receive personal property tax relief. And my staff explained that at the time the city did not allow for that in their code. So I promised that citizen that I would investigate his request and learned that the state does allow for this tax relief, but it has to be passed, a city ordinance has to be passed in order to offer this exemption. So I contacted a number of other localities to see if they offered this tax relief, and much to my surprise, they all did. Now again, I just called a small number of colleagues that I've worked with in the last few months, and our neighboring city, James City County, also offers this exemption. So today I'm here to ask you to consider offering a similar exemption, and the details of it are the exemption would allow for a disabled veteran to have their tax exemption for one motor vehicle that is owned and regularly used for personal transportation by any disabled veteran of the United States Armed Forces. In order to qualify under this section, the disabled veteran must provide a written statement to the Commissioner of the Revenue from the Department of Veterans Services, and I will explain to you in just a moment about what those qualifications are in order to be disabled. The veteran, if a veteran is blind, there's a description of what that qualification is, and then finally we would allow for the exemption beginning this tax year, not retro reimburse. The definition of disabled veteran is a veteran who has either lost the use of one or both legs, or an arm or a hand, or who is blind or who is permanently and totally disabled as certified by the Department of Veterans Services. Just wanted to give you a little sample of what the financial impact might be for the city. There are currently 16 permanently disabled veterans receiving real estate tax relief, and in that sampling, just 4,000. The tax on the one vehicle would result in less than $4,000 loss in revenue to the city this year. Now, I do want to also qualify that by saying not all of the disabled veterans that would ask for this relief own property, so there will be more, but we don't anticipate it being a large number of citizens requesting this relief. The other thing I just wanted to point out is that a veteran can receive real estate relief at 70% disability, but in order to receive personal property tax relief, they would have to be 100% permanently disabled. So that's all I have. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you, Ms. Overy. I appreciate you coming in, and certainly glad that you were able to do this research for the resident who queried, because I think veterans that served our country in war, deserve, just a little bit more, particularly if they're disabled. And so, I guess just one question: nothing in this qualification speaks to their income level.
That is correct.
Okay, yeah, that's all the question I have.
Thank you, Ms. Overy, for your presentation, and like my colleague said, thank you for your due diligence in following up for the resident. I think it's a great program, and happy to support it. Thank you.
I'd like to add my thanks to your investigation and bringing the matter before council. And so this would bring us in line with the Code of Virginia as far as the same requirements and definition as what's already in the code. This would just be bringing the local ordinance.
So the state code does not require this. This is decided by each locality if they want to offer this exemption, and that's why the state code requires that the locality adopt an ordinance in order to offer the exemption. So we are not out of line with state code. This is something that we have the option of participating in.
But as what was listed in state code, and as far as the definition,
Correct.
it's in compliance there.
That's correct. Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. No questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I agree with Mr. Pons. I mean, somebody who's put their life on the line and sacrificed some of their health and well-being for the rest of us. We should be doing something for them. The one question I would have, and it's not about whether or not we would approve this, it's just about understanding or making sure the public understands who is eligible. The language in here says, the last part is, or who is permanently and totally disabled as certified by the Department of Veteran Services.
Yes, sir.
And I ask about that because I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's a retiree veteran, and he mentioned that he was surprised to find out that he was 40% disabled, according to, I guess, the VA. And I was surprised by that too, because he's, regularly engages in rigorous activity, seems like a really healthy guy. And he was telling me that he works with people who are fully employed who are considered 100% disabled. Is that determination of 100% disabled the same thing as permanently and totally disabled as certified by the Department of Veteran Services, or are they different categories? And I don't even know if, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to know that answer.
Both require a certification from the same department. So if we get a certification that says they're permanently and totally disabled, or in other words, meets the requirement of this definition in the city code, then they will get the exemption.
Okay, I guess my question was, maybe let me frame it another way. Is it possible that there's somebody who has the designation of being 100% disabled who's not somehow falling into the permanently and totally disabled category? So could somebody think that they're eligible for this, but then technically maybe aren't?
So in my experience, my father's a veteran, and we've gone through this exercise in James City County, and to be proven to be permanently and totally disabled, I mean, there's doctors involved, there has to be, certification to the VA, and so there's an onerous process to doing that.
Well, I guess
it's a thorough analysis.
Yeah, my question is, could somebody be 100% disabled but not fit into that category, so that they might think they're eligible for it but really aren't?
I need to clarify that. What I have received in the request that has already been made to me is that the Department of Veterans Affairs gave a designation on the paperwork of either permanently or partially disabled and the percentage of their disability. So I'm not sure how to answer that specifically, but I do know that those two pieces of criteria were provided on the documentation that I received from.
I mean, they would seem to be the
President.
same thing.
You would think, but I don't want to say that for sure without.
And I just don't want anybody to be misled when we adopt this, that they might think that this is a benefit that applies to them if it potentially does not. So maybe we could find that out. So we all in agreement? Do I hear a motion?
I move City Council approve proposed ordinance number 18-06.
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Motion passes. And the third item under new business is consideration and approval of an amended memorandum of understanding with the Williamsburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority. Ms. Shelton?
So on Monday, the Williamsburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority Board of Commissioners met and approved an amendment to the Memorandum of Understanding between the city and the Housing Authority that alters the configuration of the board. Currently, the MOU provides that the mayor will serve as the chairman and the vice mayor will serve as the vice chairman of the Authority Board of Commissioners. This allows any member of City Council to serve as the chairman and any member of council to serve as the vice chairman.
So I think it's pretty straightforward, and I think in a democratic society that we are, those positions, make sense that they would be up for election amongst the board members. So I think it's keeping with our system of government.
And just to clarify for anyone who hasn't read the agenda item summary, it's the only folks that could be eligible for chairman and vice chairman are the members of council.
That's
we also
correct.
have two other residents who will serve with us.
Yes, that's
in the
correct.
makeup. Okay. And no further questions, support the motion.
I have no further questions. No questions.
No questions?
Do I hear a motion?
I move that City Council approve the third amended memorandum of understanding between the Williamsburg City Council and the Williamsburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority dated August 6, 2018.
Second.
There you go. You can have it.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
That concludes our new business. Brings us to open forum. Anybody who would like to address council, we'd ask that you come forward, offer your name and address, and if you could keep your comments to 5 minutes or less, we would appreciate that. Seeing no one, we'll close the open forum. Have items for closed session?
Yes, sir, we do. I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personal matter, subparagraph 1 concerning city manager search, and then one matter regarding records per subparagraph 39 regarding confidential and proprietary information furnished by a private business located in the city to a promise of confidentiality used by the public body for business, trade, tourism, development, and one matter regarding records per subparagraph 39 and subparagraph 5 regarding a prospective business where no previous announcement has been made of the business interest in locating in the city. Both of these matters are for the purpose of discussing economic development incentives.
Ms. Felico, if you captured all of that, I'm amazed.
I will wait.
I've got a copy of it.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Council will take a brief recess and reconvene in closed session.
Torture.